Warning: contains spoilers. It is my contention that feudalism is a natural condition of human beings. Not that it is the only condition, not that it is the right condition, but it is just a way we fall into organizations. Frank Herbert, Dune author. In today's creative landscape, Villeneuve's Dune trilogy strikes me as the uncontested aesthetic and cultural pinnacle, merging high art quality and populist appeal, raising Herbert's pulpy sexed-up franchise into something like the soft power equivalent of a stealth bomber. Aging, but unrivaled. So what's the payload it's delivering? What is it saying? Social media commentary on the movies often includes the true enough observation that Paul is not really a heroic figure, but rather a false prophet and a treacherous white savior who will end up being just as evil as the imperial household or the BDSM-adjacent Harkonnens, from whom, it was revealed in Episode 2, he is partially descended. This is presented as a radical, woke take. What is less commonly, but increasingly added, is that this skepticism of charismatic leaders was explicitly expressed by the book's author, the creator of the Dune franchise, Frank Herbert. What is almost never pointed out is that Herbert, a Republican speechwriter, Cold Warrior and McCarthyist, meant primarily progressive charismatic leaders like JFK. It is my contention that the difference between a hero and an anti-hero is where you stop, Herbert said in a 1965 interview. 2 years earlier, JFK's story had been stopped, preventing what, in Herbert's mind, was a looming catastrophe. In a 1981 interview with Mother Earth News, he tells a delightfully pseudonymed interviewer called Plowboy that the only real difference between Nixon and Kennedy was Nixon wasn't as charismatic and was therefore less able to get away with a similar level of deception and criminality. He does this without argumentation or example, as if it is obviously true. Herbert, there is definitely an implicit warning in a lot of my work against big government and especially against charismatic leaders. After all, such people, well-intentioned or not, are human beings who will make mistakes. And what happens when someone is able to make mistakes for 200 million people? The errors get pretty damned big. For that reason, I think John Kennedy was one of the most dangerous presidents this country has ever had. People didn't question him, and whenever citizens are willing to give unreined power to a charismatic leader, such as Kennedy, they tend to end up creating a kind of demigod, a leader who covers up mistakes instead of admitting them, and makes matters worse instead of better. Now, Richard Nixon, on the other hand, did us all a favor. Plowboy, you feel that Kennedy was dangerous and Nixon was good for the country. Herbert, yes, Nixon taught us one hell of a lesson, and I thank him for it. He made us distrust government leaders. We didn't mistrust Kennedy the way we did Nixon, although we probably had just as good reason to do so. But Nixon's downfall was due to the fact that he wasn't charismatic. He had to be sold, just like Wheaties, and people were disappointed when they opened the box. Daniel Immerwahr, in the only example of a published work I have found where this attitude of Herbert's is challenged, wrote in 2020 for the Los Angeles Review of Books that the point, as Herbert saw it, was to discipline readers, to punish their love for Paul as a way of warning them against big government, and especially against charismatic leaders. In the era of the Great Society, when the federal government made headlines defending civil rights, establishing Medicare and Medicaid, launching public television and funding K-12 schooling, Herbert's main concern was state overreach. My favorite word in this paragraph is discipline. Herbert wants to discipline readers. This cuts to the core contradiction of the subjectivist, amoral, anti-teleological take on world history which currently predominates. It says, you can't go around telling all the wonderfully diverse people what's good and bad, imposing your views on them like a monoculture. That would be bad. Pointing out this contradiction, one will generally be met with an exasperated, the dummy doesn't get it sigh, and with each tired sigh, intellectual courage descends, first into skepticism, then mere cynicism, then the all-pervasive, compulsory nihilism of our age. We are all Herbertian now. I conduct vox pops for social media to promote local politics in the pub-style events. I remember clearly a conservative nativist Australian saying that if people called him racist, that was an attack on his free speech. I countered that perhaps his critics were merely using their free speech to respond to what he had said. He said it was different since their intent was censorious, in that they wanted him to shut up. His intentions, being merely hateful but not censorious, were protected by an invisible layer of nihilism and disbelief. We're all Herbertian now. The dominant ideology is postmodern, culturally rich, environmentally conscious, political conservatism. A kind of Zen fascist nihilism that scorns all forms of political, philosophical, or even personal idealism. Nobody is allowed to have big, beautiful visions for the future. That would be an arrogant, unforgivable indulgence in the sin of unearned moral feeling. The intellectual equivalent of red meat, or maybe processed sugar. The Christian urge to self-abnegation ultimately denies itself even the satisfaction of righteous suffering. Raising progressive hopes, inspiring people to dream of a better future, that was Kennedy's sin in Herbert's world. Herbert's goals here line up with the cynical mantra of our age, which I have identified in a previous essay as be realistic, think small, aim low. In that same essay, I went on to write, this cultivated postmodern cynicism, with its skepticism of meta-narratives, might have seemed genuinely edgy and radical in the mid-20th century. But by now it should be pretty clear that all it leads to is the rise of cottagecore folk politics and, ultimately, anti-vaxxers like RFK Jr. running the US Department of Health and Human Services. We're so down to earth that the worms are eating our brains. Here the left, seduced and overcome by the seemingly irresistible creep of these sophisticated, subtle, Herbertian values through society, is as guilty as the machine it rages against. Like Christians after Constantine, they have gone from being a challenge to the status quo to the glue that holds it all together, taking the rage of the lower classes and transmuting it into paralyzing guilt and empty ritual. Timed showers, paper straws, canvas bags, ever longer and more elaborate acknowledgements of the traditional owners, alongside total practical and legal recognition of the actual owners according to colonial law. They pay their respects to the traditional owners. They pay money to the landlord. This, we are told, is the best they can do, and we should probably listen. The left, once the great protagonists of history, has cast itself permanently in the role of reaction and resistance, forever the underdog to a permanently ascendant capitalist establishment. They are far more comfortable there, freed of the responsibilities of actual leadership, never having to test their ideas against reality, than they would like to admit. And so they will feel radical as they nod along when the third movie drops later this year, and the moral of the story is revealed to be an existential cosmic shrug. Once ascendant, the oppressed become the oppressors, and the cycle of samsara continues. Herbert's cosmos is ultimately one without stakes. It's all a big nothing anyhow. The inevitable implication is political quietism and a lack of moral ambition. The Atreides rule, the Harkonnen rule, the Kennedys, the Bushes, won't change a damn thing. The merciless, eternal rules of power apply all the same. As another science fiction writer, Ian M. Banks, wrote, "A guilty system recognizes no innocence."